What if the reason your life feels stuck is not because you are lazy, not because you are unlucky, and not because the world forgot you, but because you have been trained to believe that peace must be purchased with pain? Think about that. Every morning you wake up tired. Every night you collapse with nothing left. You keep moving, keep grinding, keep pushing, and still the numbers do not work, the pressure does not ease, and the future does not open. So here is the real question. What if the door does not open with more force? What if it opens when you finally stop fighting it? Stay with me, because this story is not about a man who got lucky. It is about a man who was squeezed so hard by life that he had nothing left to give. And that was exactly when everything began to change. He had spent years believing that survival meant sacrificing his body day after day until there was almost nothing human left in him except habit. He rose before daylight. He worked until his muscles burned. He dragged himself home carrying fatigue like a second skin, and after all that effort, after all that time, after all that pain, he still sat in a small room with bills on the table, fear in his chest, and no clear way out. If you have ever felt like life keeps taking and never returning, then listen closely, because the shift that changed everything for him was far simpler than anyone would expect. This man had done what the world told him to do: work harder, endure more, be realistic, accept that life is heavy, and carry it without complaint. So he did. For years he traded his strength for wages that disappeared almost the moment they arrived. He knew the sound of early alarms, stiff joints, and quiet panic. He knew what it felt like to stare at expenses and mentally cut them apart, hoping numbers would somehow show mercy. He knew the cruel routine of giving your best energy to the day and still ending the week behind. Worse than the physical pain was the inner collapse. It was the feeling that no matter how much he gave, life kept asking for more. He was not dreaming anymore. He was just recovering enough to do it again tomorrow. That is a dangerous place for any person to live in for too long, because when exhaustion becomes normal, struggle begins to feel like identity. He no longer thought of himself as someone moving toward freedom. He thought of himself as a tired man trying not to drown. And that is where so many people quietly live. They do not expect joy. They do not expect ease. They only hope the next blow is smaller than the last. But life does not simply respond to your actions. It reflects the state you keep returning to. And his state, no matter how decent or hardworking he was, had become one of burden, pressure, and endless effort. Without realizing it, he had accepted struggle as his inner home, and every new day kept confirming it. When he first heard that imagination mattered, that inner assumption shaped outer events, he was interested but also desperate. Desperation can make people reach for truth, but it can also make them turn truth into another task. That is exactly what happened. He thought, if inner states create outer results, then I must work at that too. So at night, when his body was already worn down, he tried to force his mind into perfect pictures of success. He tried to see more money. He tried to imagine conversations. He tried to feel rich while feeling broken. He tried to hold scenes in place while sleep pulled at him and anxiety whispered that he was failing. The whole thing became another shift, only this time the labor was mental. And the more the Maharishi he strained, the more impossible it felt. The image would fade, his focus would break. Then frustration rushed in. He wondered if he was doing it wrong, if others had some secret ability he lacked, if maybe change was only for people who had energy left at the end of the day. Listen carefully, because this matters. When the mind treats inner work like another burden, it carries the same vibration as the outer struggle. Effort can be useful in practical things, but strain is not the same as faith. If you are wrestling to make something feel real, part of you is still confessing that it is not real yet. That tension says more than your words ever could. And for him, every forced attempt only reminded him how far away relief seemed. Night after night, he repeated the mistake many people make. He believed the answer had to be bigger, more detailed, more intense. He thought if he could just create the perfect picture and hold it long enough, something outside him would finally change. But the harder he pushed, the more tired he became, not just physically, spiritually, emotionally. The process that was supposed to free him began to feel like another demand placed on his exhausted life. He was no longer lifting heavy tools with his hands only. He was lifting heavy expectations in his mind, and somewhere in that quiet misery, a truth started to reveal itself. Real inner change does not feel like forcing open a locked door with shaking hands. It feels like release. It feels like stepping out of the storm inside yourself. It feels like no longer arguing with reality long enough to enter a different state. That was the correction he had been missing. He did not need a more impressive method. He did not need a more vivid scene. He did not need to become mentally athletic after spending his whole day in survival mode. He needed a way to stop repeating struggle at the level of feeling, because the outer life he hated was being fed by an inner mood he kept returning to without question. He was sleeping in tension, waking in fear, moving in effort, and expecting peace to come later. But later never came. That is why what happened next was so powerful. It was not dramatic, it was not complicated. It was almost too simple for the thinking mind to respect. And yet, simple things, when felt deeply, can redirect a life. One night he reached a point where he could not keep performing, not even inwardly. His body was beyond tired. His mind had no appetite for another round of trying. He lay down and dropped the whole struggle for a moment. No scene, no careful picture, no attempt to mentally construct some polished future. He wanted one thing only: relief. Not tomorrow, not eventually. Relief now. The kind of relief a person feels when the burden has already been removed. And from that need came a short, gentle phrase, a phrase that did not demand effort, a phrase that did not ask his tired mind to build an image, a phrase that implied the problem was no longer in motion because the answer already existed. He closed his eyes, breathed out, and softly repeated, "It is already taken care of." That was it. No argument, no performance, no pressure to feel fireworks, just those simple words. Again and again, like a quiet rhythm carrying him away from strain. It is already taken care of. He did not ask how. He did not demand proof. He did not try to control who or what would move. He let the phrase do what his effort never could. It softened him. His shoulders loosened. The tightness in his chest eased. The restless mental noise that usually chased him into the night began to grow still. For once he was not a man trying to fix his life before sleep. He was a man resting in the suggestion that the weight had already been lifted, and because he was so tired, his usual resistance did not rise with the same force. He simply drifted into sleep inside that feeling. Do not miss why this worked. The power was not in magic words. The power was in the state those words allowed him to enter. There is a huge difference between saying something with tension and saying it with surrender. If he had whispered the same phrase while secretly checking the world for proof, it would have become another effort. But he used it like a lullaby, not a command. He let it carry the emotional tone of completion. That tone mattered more than any perfect image could have. Think about how you speak when a problem is truly over. Your body changes, your breath changes, your mind stops pacing. You do not clutch, you release. That is the state he entered. And each night he returned to it. Nothing outside changed right away. The same alarm still rang. The same labor still waited. The same bills still arrived. But something inside him was no longer arranged around panic. This is where many people quit too early, so hear me out. When the outer world does not move immediately, the old self wants to declare failure. It wants to say, "See, nothing happened." But the deeper shift always begins where the eyes cannot yet measure it. He kept using the phrase. He kept letting himself sink into the feeling of a man whose life was no longer under threat. Not because he saw evidence, but because night after night he refused to sleep in the old state. He stopped rehearsing helplessness. He stopped worshiping the visible facts. He stopped going to bed as a victim of circumstances and began going to bed as someone whose burden was handled. As the days moved on, he noticed changes that were subtle but important. He was still doing the same work, yet he no longer dragged the same fame in a panic through the day. The fear had not vanished all at once, but it was no longer ruling his every thought. When pressure rose, he remembered the feeling of release from the night before. When anxiety tried to tighten around him, he had something new to return to. It is already taken care of, not as denial, as orientation, as a quiet refusal to hand his soul back to struggle. This changed the way he met ordinary moments. He was a little less reactive, a little less desperate, a little less trapped inside the timeline of problems. And that matters more than most people realize, because when you stop feeding a condition with constant emotional obedience, you begin to weaken its hold on your life. He did not need to see the whole bridge ahead. He only needed to stop walking emotionally in the old direction. Some nights the phrase felt easy. Some nights he repeated it through a wall of fatigue and doubt. But he kept it simple. He did not start adding complicated rituals. He did not turn peace into a technique contest. He did the one thing his exhausted mind could still accept. He entered the mood of relief before sleep. And here is a line worth remembering. The state you fall asleep in is often the state you continue to breathe into tomorrow. That is why this small shift was not small at all. It was training his whole being to live from completion instead of craving it. Stay with this, because the outer movement arrived in a way no logical planning could have predicted. Then, without warning, life moved, not through the path he would have chosen, not through some plan his tired mind could have designed. One afternoon, a certified letter arrived at his apartment from a legal office in another state. At first, it looked like trouble. He almost opened it with the same sinking feeling that usually came with official mail. But the contents stunned him. Decades earlier, his father had left behind a small piece of land, dry and overlooked, a forgotten property no one in the family had considered valuable. It had sat in the background of life for so long that it barely existed in memory. But now a drilling company had discovered a large oil deposit beneath that land. The firm was not simply making a casual offer. There were legal terms, there were documents, there was money involved on a scale he had never associated with his own name. When the process was complete, he would receive a monthly royalty payment far greater than the wages he had been exhausting his body to earn. Not once, repeatedly, month after month, an income that would continue for the rest of his life. Let that sink in. The man who had spent years believing survival required backbreaking labor was suddenly faced with a new reality. He no longer needed to live that way. The burden he had felt each night was not removed by harder struggle. It was removed by a chain of events he could not have forced, predicted, or mentally engineered. The world rearranged itself after he stopped identifying as the man pinned beneath it. That is the part people often overlook. The outer answer came through channels beyond his conscious design, but it matched the inner state he had been sleeping in. He did not receive this change because he had become better at trying. He received it because he stopped worshiping effort as the source of deliverance. He stopped making struggle sacred. He stopped assuming that pain was proof of worthiness. That is a lesson many people need to hear again and again. You have been taught to trust tension. You have been taught that if you are not exhausted, you're not serious. You have been taught to admire the version of yourself that suffers quietly and keeps going. But suffering by itself does not create freedom. Repetition of stress does not automatically become abundance. The outer world often keeps echoing the inner role you refuse to leave. If you keep feeling like the overworked one, the overlooked one, the one always trying to catch up, life has a strange way of casting you in the same path again. That does not mean action is useless. It means action follows identity more than most people understand. This man's actions did not instantly change, but his state did. He no longer climbed into bed mentally bowing to hardship. He no longer used night to rehearse fear. He used it to accept relief. And because of that, he became inwardly available for a different future. Listen closely here. You are not asked to manipulate every event. You are asked to stop chaining yourself emotionally to the problem long enough for a new pattern to take shape. That is not passivity, that is alignment. It is not pretending the bills are not there. It is refusing to make those bills the final authority over your inner condition. Now bring this closer to your own life. Maybe your burden is money, maybe it is a job that drains your spirit, maybe it is debt, loneliness, family pressure, or the quiet fear that nothing will ever really change for you. The details may be different, but the trap is often the same. You keep waiting for the world to improve before you allow yourself to feel safe. You keep saying, once this is solved, then I will breathe, then I will rest, then I will trust. But that order keeps you tied to the very state, producing more of the same. The deeper shift begins when you dare to reverse it, when even for a few moments you let yourself feel as though the matter is settled, not because the evidence says so, but because you're done feeding the old identity. Imagine the relief of no longer carrying the problem as your private religion. Imagine ending the day without mentally kneeling to fear. Imagine letting one simple sentence become the doorway out of mental overwork. It is already taken care of. You do not need to decorate it. You do not need to impress anyone with perfect technique. Let it be soft. Let it be steady. Let it lower the volume of panic in your body. Let it interrupt the old habit of solving life at midnight. Some of you have been trying so hard to change your circumstances that you have never noticed how addicted your nervous system has become to effort itself. That is why ease can feel unfamiliar at first. That is why simple can feel too small. But simple is powerful when it moves beneath resistance. And if this message is reaching you at the exact moment you feel done, then maybe done is not failure. Maybe done is the doorway. So tonight, do something different. Do not wrestle with 10 different methods. Do not force a bright picture if your mind does not want to hold one. Do not make inner change into another exhausting assignment. Lie down. Let the day end. Let the body be heavy if it is heavy. Let the mind be quiet if it can, and if it cannot, give it one gentle path to follow. It is already taken care of. Say it slowly. Say it as if the weight has genuinely left your shoulders. Say it until your breathing changes. Say it until the need to chase an answer softens. Say it not to convince the universe, but to release yourself from the old role. Because the moment you stop gripping the problem with your whole identity, space opens. And in that space, things begin to move. Maybe not always how you planned. Maybe not through the door you were staring at. But life has more roads than your tired mind can count. If this spoke to you, hold on to it. More importantly, test it. Not once in panic, but nightly with calm persistence. Let relief become familiar. Let ease become believable. Let completion become your last feeling before sleep. And when the mind asks, but what if nothing happens? Answer it with softness, not debate. You do not need to know the route. You do not need to force the bridge. You only need to stop sleeping in the state of defeat. The world can change faster than your current logic allows. And sometimes the turning point begins in the quietest way possible, with a tired person, a dark room, a surrendered breath, and a simple truth repeated until it feels like home. It is already taken care of.